The Fast Pound, Slow Pound podcast is where we speak to successful business owners and entrepreneurs about their challenges, their journey, and how they've got to where they are today. And with that said, let's get into the podcast. Ross, you've got a portfolio of 6 companies turning over £26 million. But before we get into all that, could you take me back to where it started?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a long story, but it starts back in 2006 when I started my very first company, which was an occupational physiotherapy company. We grew it really slowly, kind of organically, up to 35 members of staff. And the world was good at that time. And then we were called into a meeting with our biggest client, who was Amazon. And they said, we're giving you too much money. We're just going to do it ourselves. Yeah. And momentarily, the world kind of fell in, and we're like, wow, this is a huge percentage of our turnover. But that actually turned out to be the best thing ever, because it freed up my time and gave me this desire to never be so reliant on one client again. That led to the discovery that even small businesses could grow through acquisition. And that was 7 years ago now. And since then, we've acquired 16 businesses.
Wow. Before we get into the business stuff, can you tell me who Ross was in school?
Oh, that's a good question. Who was I in school? I was, I guess, the quiet kid who was comfortable with pretty much anybody, but didn't really have a tribe, I would say. So I was in all the sports teams, but I didn't really hang out with the sports people. I was in the chess club, but I didn't really hang out with them after school. So I kind of skated across everywhere, but didn't really have a home, I would say.
Why do you think that was?
Maybe just hadn't quite found out who I was then, probably. Even in my 20s, I probably spent most of my time trying to be liked rather than just being myself. And then it was only when I was older, I kind of discovered that, everybody can't like you. You've just got to be yourself.
That's interesting. When do you think you found that out?
Late 30s.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
Interesting. So what made you, did you want to be an entrepreneur? Or, did you want to be an entrepreneur, I guess?
I don't think so. I just didn't like being told what to do. And maybe that's the same thing.
It's a common trait, isn't it? Yeah.
So I'm a physiotherapist by background. I worked in the NHS for 18 months, and I had a brilliant, brilliant manager. She let me move around the musculoskeletal areas of the hospital. And after 18 months, she said, you've got to go on to care of the elderly or neuro rehab. And I said, I don't really want to, so I think I'll leave. I'll go off and be my own boss. And she said, I thought you would. I've helped you as much as I can, but you've got to do these other things. So I went off and I locumed for a while. So it was like an agency physio. I'd go somewhere for 3 months, maybe 6 months, and then I'd go traveling for 3 months, go snowboarding for a couple of months in California, or go off to Thailand.
Nice.
And then eventually that kind of led to, I don't really think I could take a full-time job with anybody. So what am I going to do? And eventually, with my wife's kind of support, I guess, a little bit of a push, started our first business.
It's interesting. So it sounds like you had a lot of freedom there.
I did, yeah.
Do you think you've got a better lifestyle now than you did then?
I've definitely got a better lifestyle now because I've got more financial freedom. Mm-hmm. Back then I had more time freedom, I would say, because I had less responsibilities. I had no kids. Yep. I didn't own a business. I remember once, and I certainly wouldn't advocate my children ever doing this, but I had a job as an agency physio, and I said, can I have a month off? And they said, no. I said, all right, I'm just not going to come back then. So I just left. There was loads of jobs at the time. It was really easy to get another one. So that was, maybe not the best thing to do, or I certainly wouldn't tell my children to do such a thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because that's how actually I started my own business. I got called in for a review. I said, I've not progressed in 2 years. I want a promotion. They said, no. I said, I'm leaving. And actually, that's how I started my own business. And I've got the paperwork as well, of the minutes of the meeting, which Brilliant. I look back to. But yeah, I think it's a common trait, isn't it, between people who want to start their own business, don't really like being told what to do, and then they just make that decision.
Yeah, and then they're off. Even in when you see people sell companies, if they sell it to private equity or they sell it to a larger trade buyer, if there's a big earn-out component, often that never gets paid out because all of a sudden the previous owner has now got a boss. They have to report to someone every Friday, they've got to give them the numbers, and after 6 months, 9 months, they're like, do you know what? I'm just going to leave. You can keep the rest of it.
That's interesting, that.
It must be hard, though.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Yeah, going from not having to answer to anyone to all of a sudden. Yeah, especially when your business is involved as well, because there's a big emotional attachment to it as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. During COVID, we got some support from a hedge fund in London, and they lent us £5 million to do a deal with the Irish government. And after that went through, I sat down with them and they said, do you want any further investment to do more deals? I said, what does that look like? He said, well, you're going to have a boss. Like, if we invest in the company and we take a majority stake, then you're going to report to us, basically. I said, no, thanks. I'll keep doing it myself.
So that you'd not changed then, had you, from like not being like to be told in school what to do, right the way up to like your professional career?
I'd never thought of it that way, but yeah.
So you've not changed. That's interesting. So you started out as a physio, that's right. Can you talk to me about the journey from being a physio to ultimately what you're up to today?
Yeah, so I always describe this, that I've had 3 epiphanies in my life. So the first one was when I qualified, and like most physios who qualify, they want to go into sports. In my head, when I first qualified at 21, I thought I was going to be a physio for Tottenham Hotspur.
Right.
And I went and learned all of the different sporting injuries I could possibly learn. I went on courses at the weekend to learn about netball injuries and elbow problems. And I had this realization that most of my patients only played sport for about an hour a week, at best. But all of them worked for about a third of their life when you add it all up. So in my head, I thought, well, if I learn about workplace health instead of sporting injuries, I can be a better physio. I can actually help that person more. So the epiphany was actually I should stop learning about sports injuries and learn about workplace health, which is what I did. And that's what ultimately led into that business being started. Now, when I started that business, I then had a second epiphany quite quickly, which was I could be the best occupational health physiotherapist in the world, but if nobody knew who I was, how was my business going to grow? So that epiphany was marketing. And I then spent a couple of years learning about marketing, how to drive traffic to our clinic, how to grow it. I spent a lot of time learning about joint ventures. And that naturally led on to the third epiphany then, which was, as I mentioned, when we had the news from Amazon that we were no longer their supplier, we stumbled across this world of acquisition, that you could grow through acquisition as well. And the third epiphany was you could grow way faster by buying a company than organically growing through marketing. So that was my journey from physio to where we are today.
Yeah, interesting. So how did Amazon leaving turn into acquisition? I can't make the...
So we had basically a great big hole. So at the time we had 35 members of staff. We were doing about 1.7 million at the time, which for a physio company was a lot. And all of a sudden we lost, I think 65, nearly 70% of our work. So we had a great big hole. I had a load of free time and a desire, 1, to grow the company again, and 2, never to be so reliant on any company again. So I had this idea that we could grow an ecosystem of interdependent companies. So basically, I looked at horizontal acquisition. Could we buy other physiotherapy companies? I then looked horizontally along the timeline and thought, if we go down, like at the moment we look after working age adults, if we go down, we can maybe buy a pediatric company, look after children. And if we go up the timeline, we can buy domiciliary care companies and we can look after the more experienced end of the population. So that was the first thinking. But then expanding the ecosystem, we went up and down the supply chain as well and said, well, we buy medical supplies. Let's buy a medical supplies company, which is what we did. We then looked up and said, well, we supply to health and safety companies in order to get into the big companies that use our services. So we looked at buying a health and safety company as well. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, interesting. What have been the biggest challenges throughout that journey?
Biggest challenges, the easiest part about growth through acquisition is acquiring the business. The hardest bit is the integration afterwards. And I think a lot of people don't think that. They think the hardest thing is actually acquiring the business, but it's what comes after. So that integration is probably the most challenging piece.
Why do you think people think the acquisition is the hardest?
Probably for the same reason. So I love mountaineering, and a lot of people think the goal in mountaineering is to get to the top of the mountain, but of course you're only halfway there, and you've got the hard and dangerous bit to do, which is coming back down. And you don't finish the mountain climb until you're safely back home. And it's the same with acquisition. The goal is I want to buy that company and double, triple, or quadruple my turnover, but you're only halfway there. You've actually got all the hard work to do, which is implementation. But I think people focus on that goal rather than what happens afterwards.
How do you get around the challenges of the implementation once you've done the acquisition?
So I lean heavily on my team. So it's very, very difficult to do if you're going to do it by yourself. So we've got a fantastic team now around that are there for operations, finance, marketing, all of the key areas, HR. We've got support there, the accounting, the lawyers, corporate finance people. All of these extended team members make it easier and easier and easier.
Does that sit in like a top core or a board? Which then
so we've got like an advisory team. They sit outside and they will skirt across any business that we acquire. We've then got certain team members that sit in our holding company, but we can parachute them in where necessary. So maybe someone doesn't need a full-time marketing person or a full-time managing director, but they can borrow one for a week or 2 weeks or a month for a particular project, which keeps the cost down for them and keeps us involved in the businesses.
Interesting. So if a business owner is listening to this and they're wanting to grow by acquisition, what would your advice be to them?
So, well, I'm a big believer in masterminds, in mentors, in courses. I personally believe that they compress time. So whether you're looking to learn how to buy a business, to get into property investment, cryptocurrencies, or whatever it might be, find a mentor that you resonate with and learn from them. Because if it's taken them 20 years to accumulate that knowledge, maybe they can help you learn that in 2.
And is that the journey you took as well on yours?
Yeah, so I've spent about $250,000 altogether on training over the last 7 years. I've learned from lots of the gurus or the people out there that teach these type of things, and each one of them taught me something that I took away. So, like all courses, 80% of it you forget, some of it you latch on to, and it makes sense and resonates with you. So all of the people I've learned from, I've taken little bits and kind of worked out a style that feels right for me.
What are your biggest? Can you sort of recall the biggest takeaways that you've had from those mentors or courses?
So the biggest takeaway is probably when I first started in the world of small business acquisition, I thought it was black and white. I thought, there's going to be one way to do it. You did this, you signed a contract, and then X happened. But it's not like that at all. You literally can agree anything on a contract as long as both parties agree to it.
Yeah.
So it's not black and white. It's hugely grey. That was the first thing that I probably learned and took away.
Would you say that's that can be seen as the possibility to be creative with a deal?
100%. Yeah. I mean, so our first deal, if I think back to that, so it was a physiotherapy practice. Our head office was in Gateshead. This was in Newcastle. I was introduced by a friend, got on incredibly well with the owners. Both of them wanted to retire. They were advancing in age. Their health wasn't the best. And we agreed a price. They said, how much do you think it's worth? I said, I think it's worth X. And they said, oh, we thought it would be worth more than that. I said, well, this is why I think that. And they went, okay, it makes sense. You've got good rationale. Are you going to give us all the money up front? And I said, I actually haven't got any money. And they went, oh, well, what are you going to do? I said, can I pay you slowly over time? And they said, actually, that works out really well. We think you're the right fit for this company. We know you're going to take after our staff and you're going to take after our clients because you treat patients the same as we do. and that gives us guaranteed income for the next 3 years. So I didn't mean it to happen like that. It just kind of did. But then from then, that led on to, a variety of other structures over the years as well.
That's interesting. So you said £250,000 on mentorship or courses.
Yeah.
When was the first course on mentorship that you went on?
2017, I went on a course called the Harbour Club.
Okay.
Jeremy Harbour, so we're still friends now. He's a great guy, taught me a lot over the years. I went on in 2017 and I didn't do anything with it for 2 years. I kind of just procrastinated and thought, maybe I don't want to overpay for something, so I won't make an offer. And what if I underpay for something or under offer and offend someone?
Yeah.
So I'd procrastinate, but then eventually that deal that I just mentioned kind of just fell into our lap. And that was the catalyst then to think, okay, you can do this. So then we started growing.
So what courses did you go from there? Was there more courses, or has it been more masterminds? And
a bit of a mixture. So I've probably worked with 5 or 6 different trainers over the years. And
all focused around M&A, or is it?
So those later ones were. Before that, I was in different masterminds for marketing and scaling companies.
Yeah, interesting. Could you touch on that a little bit? Like, what courses were there? What did you learn?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the gentleman I learned the most from was a guy called Daniel Priestley.
Yeah.
Who's written a number of awesome books. And a guy called Nick James. Nick James runs an event called Expert Empires, and I was in his mastermind for a while. And he's taught me a lot that I still use today. One of them that you've heard me say before is that all businesses have £10 tasks, £100 tasks, and £1,000 tasks. That was Nick that explained that to me sort of 10 years ago, maybe, a long time. And I still use that now. I think it's so important.
It's interesting. Because I really like marketing as well. I think it's so interesting, isn't it? How you can... I think you've got to know a little bit about psychology, haven't you, and what makes the consumer or the buyer or the client make a decision or tick, I guess.
100%. Yeah, I think too many people learn, whether it's property investing or whether it's investing in businesses, they learn the mechanics of how to structure a deal, but they have no clue about marketing, positioning, branding. And unless you know that, it's really hard to find someone or attract them to you.
Yeah, really interesting. Are you a part of any masterminds or networks today?
Currently not. So I've been looking for a new one for a while.
And what sort of space will that be in?
It's likely to be in sort of the private equity, venture capital sort of space. So the deals above where we're currently looking, most of the deals we're working on now are either in the 5 to 10 million range, but I want to start being in rooms where people are talking about 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion deals. So that's the room I'm looking for next. Yeah,
it's interesting because something I circled earlier was even at the age of 21, it seemed like you always wanted to be better. That's the word that you used.
Yeah.
And then still to this day, you're still looking to do that. Why do you think that is?
I personally think, I've thought a lot about this over the years, I think it's the reason we're on this planet. I think it's the reason we're born, to see what we're capable of. So I want to be the best husband I can be. I want to be the best father I can be. I want to be the best role model to whoever I'm in contact with. I want to be the best business person. I want to be the best friend. I think that's why we're here.
I think a saying comes to mind there is like, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Do you think you apply that to all aspects of your life?
Definitely. Yeah. My wife calls me all in Ross. So, I'm all in on it. So if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Could you speak about some of the acquisitions that you've done? Maybe the first one that you've done and then how they have transformed and got bigger over time?
Yeah. So the first one I mentioned, that was a physio practice. That was closely followed by a second physio practice in Sunderland. So we then had 3 practices in the northeast. We then looked to grow that through a combination of public sector tenders and organic growth, so leaning back on the marketing again. Then we eventually sold that, and we sold it to one of our suppliers, one of our clients, which was good. The most complex deal we've probably done in terms of the number of acquisitions is a domiciliary care business. So we acquired that in 2020, and since then we've done 4 acquisitions in that space. So we've just continued to bolt other businesses in behind it. And we're in talks at the moment with a merger for that business. So that merger will bring us together with another company. They've got 3 directors with a lot of experience in growing businesses and scaling them. And then we're going to grow that together.
Really interesting, because obviously you've got a hell of a lot going on.
We've got a number of businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as I say, an amazing team. So that frees me up to do great things like this.
Yeah, 100%. How do you manage your day in terms of, do you have any sort of tips or hacks that maybe you've learned from your masterminds or courses that you've implemented in order to be more efficient?
So one thing that really helps me is having non-negotiables. So every day I set myself certain non-negotiables around health and around business. And every single day, regardless of what's going on, I'll make sure those are done. So that, by the end of the day, means I've always moved forward. And the other thing, which was a guy called Rob Moore that shared this years ago, who's in the property world.
I was going to say, is that the same guy we're thinking of?
Yeah.
Rob.
And it was either on one of the talks I went to, or perhaps in one of his books, he talks about the 70-20-10 rule. So 70% of your time work on the main thing, the thing that's paying the bills, the thing that's bringing in the most cash flow. 20% of your time spend on the next big thing, and 10% of your time you can do whatever you want. You know, go off down a rabbit hole and follow something. If it works out, great. But if not, it was only 10% of your time.
Are you big on making sure everything you do is in your calendar, or do you work from a list?
I actually work from a paper diary still.
Old school.
Old school, yeah. I've tried loads of times to move onto Trello or Notion or Pipedrive, and I try it, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I've got a working memory problem, which basically means unless I see something, it doesn't enter into my brain. So when I've tried to use my iPad or my MacBook before, as soon as the screen goes black, there's nothing to remind me, and I don't do it. Whereas my paper diary goes everywhere with me. I open it, I see it, I tick something off when I've done it, or I put an arrow and move it to the next day. So up until now, that's sort of the best system that I've found. But even in the rest of my life, if my wife moves my toothbrush from the bathroom, I then don't brush my teeth, which doesn't lead on to me then taking my supplements, making a cup of tea, doing all sorts of things. So I've got lots of these little sort of strategies during the day that just kind of helps me get by.
Yeah. Do you think it's quite structured then?
Yes and no. Yes, in the fact that I have all of these little quirks or strategies to kind of help me get through things, but I don't have structure, as in I generally don't have to be anywhere. I have a few board meetings that are unmovable, if you like. I have two of those a month. Other than that, I can kind of do whatever I like.
What did you call it? Memory?
A working memory problem.
And is that something that you've checked out in terms of? Or is that,
my daughter has it as well. It's really, really interesting. So your working memory is the number of things that you can hold in your brain before it passes to your short-term memory. And how important you deem something to be makes it more likely that it will pass into your short-term memory. So the great example, and the psychologist that diagnosed us years ago gave us this example. He said, if you imagine a guy sitting on the sofa, watching football, thinking about work, and thinking about the holiday that he's got coming up and he's got to prepare for. When his wife then says, would you mind taking the bins out? And he goes, yep. And then goes back to the telly and doesn't do it. It's not because he was being ignorant or rude. It might be he's got a working memory of 3. And he can only hold 3 bits of information. And the football, work, and the imminent holiday was more important than taking the bins out. So literally it goes in one ear and out the other, not intentionally, because that's what his working memory is. Now, some people's working memory is vast. They can hold gigabytes of storage, and other people, literally, it's single figures, the amount of things they can juggle before it goes into short-term memory.
Oh, it's interesting that. Do you think that is getting shorter and shorter with obviously the way the world is at the moment with like short form TikToks and Reels? Do you think that's...
Maybe. It's linked to dyslexia and dyscalculia.
What about ADHD?
I'm not sure about that. That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Because you are sort of regarded as a men's health expert, is that right?
Yeah. So we have a men's health company, Alphagenix, and that's something I'm really passionate about. So I'm a physio by background, been in healthcare, since the 90s. I've been in the world of hormones and men's health for a decade now, due to my own experience. So I've been on hormone replacement therapy for nearly 11 years. So along the way, kind of picked up a fair amount of information, and eventually we started Alphagenix back in 2021.
What does Alphagenix do? So
we provide, we sell drugs to middle-aged men, basically, legally.
Of course. Disclaimer.
Yeah. No, we sell TRT
yeah.
to middle-aged men, mainly middle-aged men, which is HRT. Obviously, women at a certain age will often take hormone replacement therapy. Their hormones are a mixture, progesterone and estrogen. Men need estrogen as well, but in smaller amounts. And the typical hormone that we replace is testosterone.
Yeah.
So TRT is the main thing that we do.
Is that what testosterone, TRT?
Yeah, testosterone replacement therapy. 40% of men over 40 we think are low in testosterone. And remarkably, 20% of men aged 15 to 39 have been shown to have low testosterone as well.
How would you know if you had low testosterone?
So the main symptoms are low mood, low energy, low libido, brain fog, weight gain, loss of muscle mass, struggling to recover after the gym. My main symptom was aches and pains. So when I started, just all of my joints hurt. I didn't know why. It would take me longer to get started in the morning, but I could still push on and do it. So when I eventually saw the doctor, they said, can't be anything that serious wrong with you because you're still working and you've just come back from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And I was like, I can ignore it. I have to. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a business person. I can't just sit at home and do nothing. And they were like, well, there's clearly nothing serious wrong with you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. So how did you go from that to someone actually saying, you've got a problem? Because it sounded like he just sort of dismissed it, or she dismissed it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I saw 2 GPs, 3 endocrinologists on the NHS, and the last one actually said, it's all in your head, Ross. There's nothing wrong with you. Now, by this time, my brain fog was so severe, I remember driving home from work one day and giving myself a little mental agility test to name as many things in the car as I could, and I failed at the first hurdle because I couldn't tell you what the steering wheel was called.
Wow.
I was looking at it and I knew what it was, but it was like thinking through concrete. I just couldn't get the words out. And I got home, it was really scary. And I said to my wife, I said, I don't care what these doctors are saying. I know my body better than they do.
Yeah, 100%.
I've lived with it for 35 years. They've known me for 35 minutes. They're not telling me there's something not wrong. So at the time, we'd never used private medicine before. I'd always, fallen back on the NHS, I guess, as many people do. And I Googled what I was feeling, which was vague. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. And I found a guy in London who seemed to deal in vagary, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, thyroid problems, hormone issues, aches and pains. And I went to see the guy, Dr. Bernie Willis, and he changed my life on that day because he said, what's wrong? I said, it's a really long story, Dr. Willis. And he said, well, you've paid for an hour. You can talk for an hour if you want.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
I spoke for 58 minutes about how I felt. And I said, I can explain it really easily, but no one ever understands. And he said, try me. I said, do you know those antique toy robots that you see in shops that you put a key in? And he said, yeah. I said, I feel like someone needs to put the key back in my back and wind me back up. I feel like everything's slowing down and I just can't do what I want to do anymore. And he said, it's obvious what's wrong with you. Your testosterone's low. I went, how can it be obvious? I've seen 3 endocrinologists and 2 GPs, and he explained that the NHS have different protocols, quite antiquated knowledge.
It's quite a wider issue as well, isn't it? Like across the...
It really is, yeah. So I was a bit probably skeptical at this point. I was kind of like, first time going private and he's telling me I need to buy something. And I said, can you prove it? He said, yeah, we'll do a blood test. And if it comes back above here, I was wrong. It's not your testosterone. If it comes back here, you can probably fix it naturally. But if it comes back below this number, you need HRT. And I was like, HRT? What women get? And he said, yes. But men are going to take TRT. I was like, right, okay, well, let's run this test then, see if you're right. And he was absolutely spot on. And from there, it was a positive spiral because the TRT gave me more energy. Energy made me make better choices. So I would start exercising again. Then that made me eat better because I was relying on really sugary foods before then. That then meant I slept better. So everything just spiraled and got better and better and better and better and better.
There's loads to talk about there. I found this. I think it's such an interesting topic, isn't it? Like men's health, especially. Yeah, I find it such an interesting topic. So, how you were feeling at that current time? How was that affecting other aspects of your life?
Certainly, looking back, I was more irritable. I was probably short with the kids when they were young. Whereas, normally I'm pretty laid back, and it takes quite a lot to upset me. Whereas probably looking back then, that was a lot easier to happen. And the common misconception is, TRT causes roid rage or aggression, and it's the total opposite. Having optimal levels of hormones in a man chills them out, emotions are steady, and it's the opposite. So if your testosterone is low and you've got low energy, low mood, low libido, you've put weight on, maybe you've lost confidence, that's going to make you more likely to be irritable and upset easily and frustrated than brimming full of confidence with loads of energy, a good mood, healthy libido. Which one's going to make you feel worse? Clearly low T.
Yeah. Why do you think that is then? Do you think it's just a stigma around gyms and that sort of picture? Do you think that's why it gets a bad name?
It does, because most people don't understand the differentiation between medically supervised testosterone replacement therapy,
which is obviously what you do.
Which is what we do. Yeah. We basically put back in the minimum viable amount to get you to an optimal range. But a lot of the guys down the gym, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, will take super physiological levels. So they might be taking 10 times the amount I am. And the human body was, as far as we're aware, never designed to have that much testosterone in it. So that can affect then how someone reacts to situations, and it might make them a little bit more irritable. But at our level, it just levels you out.
Yeah. What were the stats again?
40% of over 40-year-old men have low testosterone. 90% probably don't know because it's not something that's widely talked about.
Why?
Probably because if you look back long enough, men were or still are, the protectors, the warriors. They're generally they were out hunting. They weren't talking because they had to be quiet to catch their prey. There's this very sort of stoic element to, I think, the masculine side of energy, if you like.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas women are more likely to share because they were at home in the cave or wherever, going back to Paleolithic times, and they were nurturing the family. It was important to share stories and talk to each other to foster a community, because you had to rely on them to look after your children. So if we go back long enough, I think we find this really big divide, and that's still there. So men still find it difficult to open up, difficult to talk. And I think it probably stems back, millennia.
So it's obviously a huge, business-wise, it's obviously a huge target market, isn't it? 40% of males ultimately need this solution or could really benefit from it. Why isn't it more... So why isn't it pushed from, say, the NHS or the government level? Do you think it would be a better society if this was fixed, I guess?
100%.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. But... the powers that be in most Western countries that we've looked at have really antiquated guidelines around this. So if we look at the guidelines in the UK, the NHS say anywhere from sort of 8 to 28 nanomoles of total testosterone in someone's system is considered normal.
Right.
Now, normal is an interesting word. Normal is designed to capture 95% of the population. So it's a huge cohort. It doesn't matter if you're 18, 88, super fit, chronically ill, overweight, underweight. They just say that's normal. Optimal is not normal. And let's be honest, who wants to just feel normal? Nobody wants to be mediocre or average. You want to be your best. You want to be optimal. And optimal is above 20. So you could go to the NHS and you might be at 8.1 and they go, you're normal. Congratulations, Matty, go away. You're like, well, I feel awful. I don't wake up with an erection anymore. My mood is terrible. I feel low. I've put weight on. And they say, you're probably depressed. I'll give you an antidepressant.
Yeah, there's some tablets.
Have some tablets. Which is
crazy.
It really is crazy because if you think about this, nobody in the history of time has ever been deficient in an SSRI. You can't be deficient in Prozac, but you can be deficient in a naturally occurring sex hormone like testosterone.
Yeah.
But they give out SSRIs, but they don't hand out testosterone.
Do you think there's a bigger agenda, or is that a bit much of a conspiracy, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think it's hard not to end up with a tinfoil hat on sometimes.
Yeah. That's what my dad calls me all the time, all that stuff. But is it better to cure something like that early? So would you advise, because you mentioned males above 40. What was the younger range that you mentioned?
20% of 15 to 39-year-olds now are low. And we think this is because of the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are in basically everything. So the water that we drink, the plastics that our food are in, the products that we put on our hair or our skin, everything's got toxins in, which reduce a man's testosterone and generally increase their estrogen. And if this happens, of course, in women as well. So 20%, of those younger men are low as well. Now, it's really hard to remove all those EDCs, all the endocrine disrupting chemicals, but you can limit them. And we're also a really big believer that TRT should be a last resort. So we don't give this out to everybody. About 50% of men that we talk to, we encourage them to try something natural first.
Interesting. What are those things?
So the 4 pillars really of healthy hormones are good food, good quality nutrition that you're putting into your body, regular exercise, which includes exercise to fatigue.
Just let me touch on that, Ross. You remember when you said you were low in testosterone, so you were craving sugar and had a bad diet. So how do you get around that double-edged sword? Because it seems...
we talk about that quite a lot actually, because it's a bit like you get into this negative spirals. When your energy is low, you generally will crave worse food, which of course, because it's nutrient poor and poor quality, you then crave even more of it. You then have sugar spikes and you're just eating more and more rubbish. So to get around that, sometimes you can encourage someone to start exercising, eating better, and they'll spiral back up. But often they're so stuck in their ways, the only thing that will do that is TRT. So if you put the right levels of testosterone in, all of a sudden energy goes up, mood gets better. That's the catalyst to start making better decisions.
Yeah.
And then you get better and better and better.
Yeah, 100%. Wow. So interesting. Is it best to cure it early, like at 15?
I don't think we can cure it. Generally speaking, if you look back over the last 50 years, testosterone has reduced 1 to 3% per year every year. So our grandparents had double the testosterone that we do. And actually, when you model this out by 2050, the human race is in trouble, because if it continues going down like this, we're not going to be actually replicating because fertility is linked to testosterone. So testosterone and fertility is declining every year, and by 2050, we won't be having enough children to replace our population, which means we're going down and down and down and down after that.
Yeah, so maybe cure isn't the right word.
Address it.
Yeah, do you think it's best to be addressed early, like round the 15-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever mark? Absolutely,
yeah. Which is kind of, taking me back to being a physio as well, where we used to go into schools and teach, younger children to be aware of their body. Actually keeping it strong, keeping it mobile is important. The problem is it's really hard to teach a child these type of things, because if you remember what you was like when you were a teenager, you're indestructible. Like, you don't have to think about stretching before you
yeah.
go for a run or all those things. You just think,
doesn't even matter what you eat, really. You're just 100 mile an hour all the time, right?
Exactly. So it's tough to get those messages through, but I do think it would be good if we could.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I just always think like, why? Because this is like so important. Why isn't it more out there? It's just, I mean, you could go down that rabbit hole all day long, couldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one.
100%. I mean, so is this where would you say your passion is?
Definitely.
Around this specific topic, would you say?
Yeah.
Do you think this is the core of it?
Yeah, so all the businesses that we own, I have, a strategic oversight, and my role is to find other businesses to acquire and bring them into the portfolio of companies that we have. But my passion is that helping men become the best versions of themselves, which we can do through, holistic means sometimes, and other times with pharmaceuticals like TRT.
Mm. So if others were feeling like how you were feeling, what would you say to them?
I would say to speak to someone, to start with.
Who can they speak to?
So they can call Alphagenix.
Yeah, that's good.
Or
that's a good start, yeah.
A good place to start is to talk to their spouse, talk to their friends, see if anybody else is feeling that way. And I do understand that it's difficult. If a man opens up to the wrong friend, perhaps he's ridiculed. If he opens up to his boss, maybe the boss then sacks him. Well, I don't think you're capable of doing your job. Maybe, and we do see this, a man opens up to his wife, and his wife then leaves him because she's like, hang on a minute, I haven't signed up to this. You're supposed to be the strong one, and now you're saying you're not. And that sounds awful, but we've seen that. So you do have to choose who you speak to, but all of us, and I don't remember this exact statistic, but over the last couple of decades, men have gone from having an average of, I think back in the 50s, he had an average of 8 close friends. In the 70s, it dropped to like 5 close friends. And now 40% of men say they haven't got one close friend, which is really scary.
That's crazy.
But, that means there are 60% that do have at least one person that they hold dear and someone that you could probably be honest with.
Yeah.
So sharing, that you're not feeling yourself, maybe you've got, mood problems or erectile problems, sharing it with someone means it's more likely you're then going to go and get help.
I wonder what that stat looks like in like business owners and entrepreneurs as well, because that's a lonely road, isn't it? Like you sort of need to cut certain things out of your life and become a different person to who you were in school, college, university, and when you were partying and stuff like that, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I think if you're serious about progressing, then you have to surround yourself with the right people. I know we've talked before, but you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Jim Rohn famously said that, I think, and I believe it's true. If you want to be a pilot, hang out with 4 other pilots. It's more likely. If you want to be a carpenter, hang out with 4 other carpenters, and you'll probably be the 5th.
The 5th one, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to encourage your children to go down the entrepreneur route?
I ultimately would like them to, but of course it's their own decision. So
why would you like them to?
Because of the freedom it's afforded me, I think. But we are all different. We talk openly at home with the kids, 1 about men's health and 2 about what we do, because they're like, what do you do, Dad? You're always there to take me to school, and whenever I need something, you're there. What do you actually do? Well, we buy businesses and own companies. Okay, then what does that look like? So we're quite open about what goes on. The fact that we do work really, really hard. It's not like we're just swanning around doing nothing. It's not like a 9-to-5 job where you might work 37.5 hours. You work a lot more than that usually most weeks. But the flip side is we try and go on holiday at least once a month, which you couldn't do if you worked for the council.
Mm-hmm. Do you work more than 37.5 hours a week?
Most definitely. Yeah, at least double, I would say. But it doesn't feel like work.
No.
Because I love what I do. So I would be bored if I wasn't doing it.
This is your hobby, I guess, as well.
It really is. Yeah. It doesn't feel taxing to have great conversations, to be on podcasts like this. This doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
But I guess for some it could be construed as that.
Outside of work, you like climb mountains and you're into things like that. Do you do that with your business, like colleagues and work, friends, let's call them, or are they like totally outside of?
totally outside. So I've got a group of friends that I've known for years.
That's interesting, yeah.
Who they're not in our day-to-day sort of business lives. One of them recently just sold his business, actually, so he's now fully retired. So we used to talk about business a little bit, but most of them are just people I've met through the years. One guy in particular, we met 20 years ago in the jungle in Bolivia, and literally we started talking because he had a Tottenham Hotspur shirt on, and I went, oh, didn't expect to see that here. We travelled through South America together for about a month. And every couple of years, one of us will just call the other one and say, fancy going to do this crazy thing?
Yeah.
And we'll go to China together, or last year we went to Armenia together, and we've been to all over the world.
Yeah.
Just randomly. Do you want to go here, Jeremy? Yeah, okay. Fancy that.
Nice. Why Tottenham?
My dad was a Tottenham fan, I think, when I was very, very young, although I didn't grow up with my father. So I think I inherited it. I must admit, though, I haven't followed football for about 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
I couldn't even tell you who plays for Tottenham now.
Yeah.
Work was getting busy, kids were growing up, something had to give, and football felt like the obvious thing.
Been keeping up with the Euros?
I watched the terrible England game the other day where we were really lucky.
It's enough to reaffirm, your choice was a good one.
It definitely is, because for whatever it was, 89 minutes, I was there thinking, this is awful. I can't believe I spent hours and days and years of my life watching this stuff. And then they obviously turned it around at the end.
Yeah. Are you successful?
That's a good question. I don't think so. No. I've still got a lot I want to do. So
what is success to you then, Ross, if you're not successful?
Another great question. I think everyone has a different definition of success, doesn't it? Some people, it might be the number of zeros in their bank account, the number of deals they've done. For me, mine's wrapped up in family time, business goals, but a lot of personal goals as well. So I want to complete the Explorers Grand Slam, which is climbing the highest mountain on the seven summits and the North and South Pole. But there's 2 lists for the 7 summits. So for the avoidance of doubt, I want to climb 9 mountains and go to the North and South Pole. So that's wrapped up in whether I'm successful, I guess.
Really? So do you think that's, if and when that is done, do you think you will actually regard yourself as successful?
Maybe, or maybe by then I'll think, I've got to add in rowing the Atlantic as well, or something like that, which very few people on the planet have ever done all of those things.
Do you really think you're not successful?
I think I have achieved a level of success that I'm lucky to, and blessed to have done, but I'm not settled yet. I've still got a lot to do.
If you could picture success, what does success look like in a man? What does that look like? If you didn't know the guy, or maybe you knew bits from social media or whatnot, and you looked at him and you could say, yeah, he's successful.
Oh, that's another really good question. I think you can probably see success by the way someone holds themselves.
That's an interesting answer. Yeah.
I think, having that calm approach, unruffled, that to me tells someone successful. They're totally happy in their own skin. They don't fly off the handle. I think that's success to me.
One of our mutual friends, Craig, one of the first things he said was how calm you are. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you were looking at yourself, you might consider yourself successful.
Maybe, yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
He was like, he runs all these different companies. He's got all this staff. He's up to everything and all sorts. And I just can't believe how calm he is. So
yeah, perhaps.
By your own definition, Ross.
Yeah,
you
maybe.
are successful. Yeah, it's interesting, that one. You've been in business for like 20 years plus. What are the habits or traits of successful people that you've seen? And then also, what are the habits that you can see about, actually, he's probably not going to be successful?
That's a great question again. And we've talked about this. I think success definitely leaves clues. I think health is a huge, huge part of it. Personally, I don't look up to anybody who is unhealthy. I've never met someone who was overweight, an alcoholic, taking drugs on a weekend and thought, you know what, I want to be like that person. So health for me is fundamental to success. I can't remember the question now.
Because obviously you've been in business for like 20 plus years, I guess. What are the traits that you've seen from successful people in terms of maybe how they carry themselves, how they operate, sort of the things that they do and they don't do?
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely starts with health. But then having those priorities outside of work. So I think someone that has strong family values, someone that's honest, someone that's transparent, someone that shows integrity with their friends, their business colleagues, and everyone around them. I think they're the traits that I've most often seen. So health, and then honesty, integrity, transparency.
So they have a life outside of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, otherwise, why do we work?
Yeah, exactly. There's a saying, which I can't fully remember what it is, but it's basically, I think, an American businessman sees maybe a Mexican fisherman.
Yes.
That's around, yeah. And it leads all the way. I can't remember how it goes, but it leads all the way around to basically like, what are you doing it for? I mean, you might be able to tell it better than me, but
the story is a businessman goes on holiday to Mexico and he sees a Mexican get out in his little boat catching fish, and he sits down with him and says, what are you doing? He said, I'm just catching fish for my family, and I'm sitting on the porch, and he's just eating it. He said, well, if you tried really hard and you sold these fish, if you bought a few more of them, you could buy a second boat. He said, well, why would I buy a second boat? And he says, well, then you could start employing more fishermen. Well, why would I need to employ more fishermen? Because then you could buy a bigger fleet of boats. And why would I do that? Because then you can buy a factory and you can start sending your fish all over the world. And he says, well, why would I do that? He says, because then you can sell your company and you can retire and you can just sit on your porch and eat fish.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
That's what I'm doing already.
Yeah, exactly. It's absolutely unbelievable. What are you working on at the moment, and what are your current goals? And
so our current goal is we want to hit a revenue of 100 million next year across our portfolio.
Next year, wow. So that's like quadruple.
Steep growth, yeah.
Quadruple, yeah. Wow.
And then 500 million 3 years after that is the goal. So on a couple of the deals that we're looking at the moment, we will hopefully hit our target next year. I'm a really big believer in setting big goals. We don't want to just go for 10% growth. We want this exponential growth, because guess what? If we don't make it, but we get 70% of the way there, that's way better than having, let's go for 10% this year. So I like setting these big goals. Will I achieve them? I don't know. Will I be disappointed if I don't? No, because we're still further ahead than where we were.
And because you've went for it as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
You can't really sort of,
If you've tried your hardest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're the goals for business.
Are you £100 million man or a £500 million man? And if you aren't, what do you need to change in order to become that person?
Oh, you've got lots of good questions, Matty. There's one thing that really holds us back, I guess, in many regards, and that's I'm not a very good public speaker, but I know that has to change likely, because if I think about someone that is a £500 million man, I see them standing on stages, delivering speeches or talking to large audiences about what they do, and that's something that terrifies me still at the moment. I have been lucky enough to speak on stages around the world. So I've spoken in Thailand and Dubai and the UK and spoke about M&A, but it's not easy every time. I don't look forward to it.
How many people are in the audience?
The biggest has only been probably 100 or so as well. Yeah. So small.
It is a fear of many people, isn't it? And I delivered an event to that's only about 15 people, but that was a real big thing to me, because I hate even introducing myself into a room. I've avoided going to say networking events because I just hate that initial introducing myself. I don't know why, but it's something that I'm working on, because I know to get to where I want to be, ultimately you have to become a different person. Yeah. And it's identifying those things, isn't it? And so public speaking, yeah. Is there any other things you think?
I think I need to be healthier. I think I need to be fitter as well. So that's part of it as well. If you kind of look at who I want to be and then work backwards, so that person is definitely more comfortable talking on stages, and they're probably healthier, fitter, make better dietary choices as well. So that's in it all wrapped up in there as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you ever feel lonely?
I guess so. Yeah, sometimes. If you're away with business, so I do travel with business, fairly frequently, and sometimes I'll sit there. People think it's glamorous traveling for work, but usually you're just sitting in a hotel waiting for a meeting to happen or something like that. And sure, yeah, occasionally you think, is it worth it? Why am I here?
Yeah, especially when you could be in your nice house with your family, and
exactly.
You're thinking
yeah,
interesting, that one. Would you say your biggest fear is public speaking, or do you think you've got other things?
No, that's definitely the biggest one.
Interesting. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Ross.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'd like to speak to you about I suppose we can speak about it now. So, if that's all right, the TRT stuff. So, what does that process look like? Because you said that the first step for someone should be to speak to someone, But like you said, it was like they know their body. You know your body better than everyone else. Yeah. So if someone thinks, actually, I think I'm low in testosterone, obviously they can reach out and speak to someone like yourself. But what does that process look like? From do you need to get a blood test, and then how does it work?
Yeah, great question. So the easiest thing someone can do actually is get a finger prick test. So you can order them online. You can order them from our website. You can order them from a plethora of different websites. They're usually around about £30, £40, depending on whether you get a consultation afterwards as well. And it's a finger prick test. You do it at home. Within a couple of days, it tells you exactly where you are on that level. Remember, between 8 and 28. Ideally, if you're doing that, and for anyone listening, you want it to be above 20. That's where most men feel at their best. If it's lower than that, then you might feel better by elevating it. And as I say, there are things you can do naturally. So exercise into fatigue, we mentioned, eating quality food rather than nutrient poor, high-calorie foods, getting quality sleep as well. Testosterone is made in the testes when we're asleep, so that can make a big difference rather than burning the candle at both ends. And then simple supplements, zinc, magnesium, boron, vitamin D. These can make a difference, maybe 20, 30%. You might
That's
find
quite
it
a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting at 16, 17 animals and you do all those things, you might get that up to 23, 24, 25 even.
Is it an expensive process? Because obviously you mentioned you can start out with getting a finger prick for £20 or £30. What does it look like after that?
So
if you do need the TRT.
Yeah, so privately it's definitely not cheap, I would say, depending on what someone classifies as cheap or expensive.
But what does that, like how much is it, which if you don't mind asking?
No, so we have 3 protocols. It's 145, 185 or £245 a month.
Okay.
Now, often people will tell us that's expensive, and it's more expensive than perhaps some of our competitors. But what we say is we're not more expensive, we're just more transparent, because the other people who are quoting lower numbers, that doesn't include any further doctor's appointments, doesn't include any blood tests, doesn't include the personal trainer that we give them, doesn't include the mental health app that we give them, doesn't include 7-day-week customer service, doesn't include the needles or the sharps boxes or the alcohol wipes. So ours is all in, because we believe that giving the best possible service is more important than trying to get someone in on a cheaper price and then upselling them all the time.
I can't believe someone would think that's expensive to boost your energy, your mood, your relationships, your confidence. Is it a magic pill?
A lot of people see it that way. Yeah. A panacea that kind of fixes everything. And I guess it's sort of like a yes and no. So it will improve many systems in the human body, but it's definitely not a magic pill. You can't sit on the sofa and eat pizza and expect that TRT is going to make a difference to you in the Superman.
Yeah.
But if you are genuinely low in testosterone and you take TRT whilst watching what you're eating, exercising regularly, getting good sleep and protecting your mental health, it's truly transformational. You know, I've witnessed it and lived it firsthand for a decade. We see men every single week. You know, every week people are going, oh my God, I can't believe this. It's like a veil has been lifted. You know, I've been living in this murkiness for years, thinking that's what life was like forever now. Yeah. And now that's been lifted and I know what it feels like to be, you know, 18 again or younger.
Yeah, I want to try some. Yeah, definitely. I'll probably start with the finger prick because I don't think you shouldn't probably have it if you don't need it.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I say, we turn away about 50% of gentlemen because they're already optimal, or we think maybe they want it for the wrong reasons. If you are genuinely low and you supplement testosterone, it is one of the best decisions you'll ever make. If you aren't particularly low and you're taking it maybe because you just want to be a little bit better, you'll probably, and we've seen this, people will fall off. You know, after 6 months, 12 months, like, it's all right.
But because they're not getting as much of a boost as someone who was genuinely low.
Exactly. Whereas if you're genuinely low, you know, and we have many men like I was who were sitting on the edge of their bed in the morning, struggling to get out of bed, just thinking, is this it? Have I got another 40 years like this? Is this what life's like? If you give that person TRT and help them modify their lifestyle, they will think that £245 is the most, you know, is the best investment they could ever make. And a lot of our guys were like, I'd pay 4 times that to feel the way I feel now. Yeah,
100%. So I think I'll try your finger prick to see to see what it says. Because I do feel like I've got a bit of brain fog and other bits like that, you see. So interesting. I think we'll speak about that a bit more.
I'll send you one in the post today.
Yeah, brilliant. Just thanks so much for coming down. It's been really enjoyable. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Ross, how can they do that?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. So Ross Tomkins on LinkedIn. You can see me there on my picture with a hat on. So I usually have.
Every time I've seen you, I've always had your hat on. I don't think I've seen you with not. Yeah.
So LinkedIn is I'm the most active, and you get answers from me on there pretty quick. But also my website, which is just rosstomkins.co.uk.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Maddie.
No worries.